Yeah, so when we're talking about the solas, I would say that really what they are is a response to particular debates that were happening in the medieval period and that needed to be hashed out in the medieval period. So what that means is you're not going to find, some extensive exposition of, say, one of the solas uh, in the church fathers, because simply those weren't the discussions that they were
Right.
having. I mean, if you look at the early centuries of the church, there are, they're dealing with things like the Marcion heresy, trying to talk about the continuity of the Old and New Testament. They're dealing with the Gnostic heresy. They're figuring out who is Jesus, how does he relate to the Father, what is this whole Trinity business?
Yeah.
These really essential questions that really had to be in place before anything else can be discussed. You got to know who is God, right? I mean, that's pretty essential. So with that being said, then does that mean that the solas are a theological novelty? I would say no. And we could go through each of them and talk about how I think they're not a theological novelty. But just to give you the short of it, the question of sola scriptura really only functions within, and the question needs to be addressed really within a developed tradition where now you have what are traditions that are not found in Scripture that are taught as dogma, and now you have a question you have to address. That wasn't going on in the time of Saint Irenaeus. You're dealing with things that the apostles taught. If you look at, for example, what Irenaeus in his Against Heresies defines as the apostolic tradition, everything he says is just what's in Scripture. So now that you have these very much extra biblical positions being purported as true because they're part of tradition, now you have to wrangle with that question. But I would say that as you look at someone like St. Athanasius and look at how he argues with Arius, I mean, read his anti-Arian treatises and ask what is his primary source of authority? Like, how is he arguing? And I would say he's certainly arguing like he believes in sola scriptura. He's arguing from a perspective that one, Scripture is clear, it's perspicuous. We can actually read the text, find out what it says, and come to a doctrinal conclusion, and that whatever doctrine is taught in Scripture, that is what has the final say in debate. He didn't appeal to the Bishop of Rome, for example, to tell him what was true or to go tell Arius what was true, because that wasn't how the church was functioning at the time. So I would say, in essence, there was a sola scriptura principle functioning. And I think the only way to argue against that is largely based on a wrong understanding of what sola scriptura means. But and then the sola gratia, grace alone. Certainly, you'd point to something like Augustine with the anti-Pelagian controversy, and I certainly think that idea is very clearly there. Sola fide, or faith alone, is something that, again, wasn't a subject of controversy, but you can certainly find the basic conceptions behind Luther's sola fide in a variety of places. You can't find a treatise on justification by faith alone or something like that, but you can certainly find the ideas, especially in the sermons of St. Ambrose. If you read John Chrysostom's exposition of Galatians, the way that he interprets works of the law and faith in relation to justification, it certainly sounds like a form of sola fide. That doesn't mean he has all the pieces together as Luther puts them together, but it can at least what I would argue is this: all of the pieces of sola fide, or all of the solas, all of the pieces are there in the tradition. That doesn't mean they have been as clearly exposited as they are later, in the same way that you can make the same argument for the pre-Nicene fathers in their exposition of the Trinity. Often they teach a kind of subordinationism if you look at their language. But what the ideas are all there. They're just trying to figure out what the best way to express this truth is. And you don't look at Justin Martyr with the same lens that you do in the, say, post-Chalcedonian church. That wouldn't be fair to Justin. And I think it's the same thing when we take now a church has had this long battle over justification. People have just kind of come through the book of Romans and Galatians. So what is Paul's argument? What's the essence? What does this term, this righteousness language mean? What's the Old Testament context? The fathers weren't doing that. So it would be really unfair to ask them to have very particular ways of defining things as happened later.